The day my grandmother's lawyer called, I was standing in the break room at work, microwaving leftover pasta and thinking about nothing in particular. That was the last ordinary moment I remember having for a very long time. Her name was Lorene, my grandmother, and she had raised me from the time I was 6 years old. Not because she had to, because she chose to. That distinction mattered to her, and she made sure I understood it. "I didn't take you in out of obligation," she told me once, sitting on the back porch while fireflies blinked in the yard. "I took you in because you were mine, and I wasn't about to let anyone tell me different." My parents hadn't died. That's the part people always got wrong when I tried to explain it. They were alive. They just hadn't wanted to be parents anymore. My father had a new girlfriend, a new life, a new set of priorities that didn't include a 6-year-old who cried for her mother in the night. My mother had checked out slowly, the way a tide goes out. One day there was less of her, then less, then one morning she was just gone. I remember the smell of her perfume on the couch cushions for weeks after. Grandma Lorene didn't talk badly about them. She didn't talk about them much at all. She just quietly became everything. She drove me to school every morning in her old Ford, sang off-key to country radio, and kept a jar of peppermints in the glove compartment specifically for me. She taught me how to write a check, how to read a lease, how to shake someone's hand and look them in the eye. She had built a small property management company over 30 years. Nothing flashy, no skyscrapers, just a portfolio of 12 residential properties scattered across the county that she'd bought one at a time, fixed up herself when she could, and rented to working families at fair rates. She was proud of that, proud of the fact that she'd never cheated anyone to get where she was. I worked with her through high school, learned the business from the ground up. After college, I came back and ran the day-to-day operations while she handled the big decisions. We were a team. We had dinner together every Sunday. She made pot roast and I brought dessert, and we watched old game shows and argued about nothing important. She got sick the summer I turned 28. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't give you a lot of time to negotiate. She handled it the same way she handled everything, directly, without self-pity, with a list of things that needed to get done. She updated her will. She met with her accountant. She called her lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Bellows who had handled her affairs for 20 years, and spent 3 hours in his office making sure everything was in order. She died in October, with me holding her hand and the window open because she'd always hated feeling closed in. The lawyer called me 6 weeks later. I didn't cry in the break room. I'd already done most of my crying. I just stood there with my pasta getting cold and listened as Mr. Bellows told me that Lorene had left me everything, the properties, the business accounts, the house I'd grown up in, all of it. He also told me in his careful, measured way that I should be prepared for some complications. I didn't understand what he meant until the certified letter arrived at my door 11 days later. My parents were suing me. Not together. They'd been strangers to each other for 20 years by then. But separately, and apparently with the same attorney, which told me everything I needed to know about how coordinated this was. My father claimed that as Lorene's son, he had a right to a portion of the estate. My mother made a similar argument. Their position, as laid out in the legal filing, was that Lorene's will unfairly excluded her biological children in favor of a grandchild, and that the will should be contested on grounds of undue influence. Undue influence. The phrase sat in my chest like something swallowed wrong. They were saying I had manipulated an elderly woman into leaving me her life's work. They were saying that everything she'd chosen, everything she'd built and planned and documented with her own careful hand, was the result of my manipulation. I sat down on the kitchen floor and read the document 3 times. Then I called Mr. Bellows. "I was afraid of this," he said. "Your grandmother was too." She knew? She suspected. She told me when we updated the will that she wouldn't be surprised if they tried something. That's partly why she was so thorough. He paused. She left instructions, actually. For exactly this situation, there's a letter she asked me to hold. A letter. She wrote it herself, 2 weeks before she passed. She asked me not to give it to you unless they contested the will. She said, and I'm quoting her, "If they behave the way I think they will, Mara is going to need to know some things." My name is Mara. It was the name she'd given me when I was born. She'd been there in the delivery room, had held me before my mother did, had whispered it first. My parents had always called me something else, a nickname I'd slowly stopped answering to after they left. I drove to Mr. Bellows's office the next morning. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten in Grandma Lorene's small, tidy script. She'd always had beautiful handwriting, the kind you learn in schools that still taught penmanship. Reading it was like hearing her voice in the room. She started by telling me she loved me, not as preamble. She'd never been one for preamble, but as a statement of fact, the way she'd state the balance in an account or the repair cost on a roof. She loved me. She had from the moment she saw me. That was the foundation, and everything else was built on top of it. Then she explained some things I hadn't known. She had offered my father money twice in the years after he left, not as an incentive to come back into my life. She'd been clear with him that she had no interest in facilitating a reunion he wasn't committed to, but as straightforward financial help because he'd been struggling and he was still her son, and she hadn't been able to turn that off entirely. He had taken the money both times. He had not thanked her. He had not asked about me. She had called my mother once when I was 9. I remembered that year as a difficult one. I'd had a hard time at school, some social cruelty that kids specialize in, and I'd cried almost every night for a month asking why my mother didn't want me. Grandma Lorraine had called her and explained what I was going through. My mother had said she was sorry to hear that, and asked if Lorraine could loan her $1,200 for a security deposit on a new apartment. Lorraine had sent the money. She had never told me about the call. "I'm telling you now," she wrote, "because I don't want you to feel guilty about any of this. Not 1 ounce of guilt. You didn't take anything from them. They left before there was anything to take. Whatever I built with you beside me, and you earned your place in it the same way I earned mine. By showing up every single day when it was hard and when it was easy, and every ordinary day in between." She'd also had Mr. Bellows compile something, a paper trail, every financial transaction between her and my parents going back 15 years, the money she'd sent, the calls she'd documented, the times my father had called, not to ask about me, but to ask for something. She had kept records of all of it because she was Lorene and she kept records of everything. "If they try to claim you manipulated me," she wrote, near the end of the letter, "show them who was actually asking for things. And then let Mr. Bellows handle the rest. That's what I'm paying him for." I laughed at that, sitting in Mr. Bellows's office, which I think was exactly what she'd intended. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February. I drove there alone. Mr. Bellows had offered to arrange a car service, but I didn't want to arrive as though I was trying to perform wealth or power. I just wanted to walk in as myself. My father was already in the hallway when I got there. I hadn't seen him in 11 years. He was heavier than I remembered, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that looked like he'd bought it recently and hadn't quite grown comfortable in it yet. He saw me and something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, more like recalibration. My mother arrived a few minutes later. She'd aged in ways that were harder to track. She looked at me the way you look at someone you're trying to remember if you know. We didn't hug. We didn't speak in the hallway. I went into the conference room and sat down next to Mr. Bellows and put my grandmother's letter on the table in front of me, face down, the way she would have done. Ready, but not showing her hand yet. Their attorney opened with a prepared statement about family legacy, bloodlines, the importance of honoring a deceased person's true wishes. He said the word manipulated twice in the first 5 minutes. I watched my parents while he talked. My father was nodding along like he'd rehearsed it. My mother was looking at the table. When he finished, Mr. Bellows cleared his throat and opened his folder. He had 15 years of financial records, wire transfers, personal checks, money orders. Every time my grandmother had sent money to her son or her daughter-in-law, documented with dates and amounts. The total, added up across 15 years, was not a small number. It was the kind of number that changes the nature of a conversation. Their attorney looked at it for a long moment. "These transactions represent gifts," he said finally, "which are documented proof of a relationship," Mr. Bellows said, "in which your clients were active participants, regular recipients of financial support from the deceased. This directly contradicts the narrative of a grandmother isolated from her children and manipulated by a grandchild. If anything, it suggests a woman who remained extraordinarily generous toward people who gave her very little in return. He then placed on the table a certified copy of the will, the accompanying notarized statement from Lorene's doctor, confirming her cognitive clarity at the time of signing, and a sworn affidavit from the notary who had witnessed the signing. He also placed a second folder which contained documentation of every time my grandmother had attempted to facilitate a relationship between me and my parents over the years, and the responses, or non-responses, she'd received. My father stopped nodding. The mediator, a composed woman in her 50s who had probably seen every version of the story, looked over everything slowly and carefully. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the heat running through the vents. "I'd like to take a short break," their attorney said. During the break, I stood in the hallway and drank bad coffee from a paper cup. My mother came out and stood a few feet away from me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "She was good to you," my mother said finally. "It wasn't a question." "She was," I said. "I know we weren't." She said it without defensiveness, which surprised me. Just a plain statement. "I know we weren't," she repeated, quieter, as though she were saying it to herself. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't offer forgiveness and I didn't offer cruelty. I just nodded and looked at the window at the end of the hallway, where winter light was coming through gray and thin. When we went back in, their attorney indicated that his clients wished to withdraw the contest. I drove home in the same car I'd arrived in. I stopped at the grocery store because I needed milk and it felt important, somehow, to do something ordinary. The store was quiet on a Thursday morning, mostly retired people moving slowly through the aisles with their carts, and I walked through it feeling like I was seeing everything from a slight distance, the way you do after something significant has happened and the world hasn't caught up yet. Back home, I made coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. My grandmother's kitchen table, the one she'd had for 30 years, the one where she'd help me with homework and talk me through every hard thing that had ever happened to me. I thought about her, about the letter, about the fact that she'd anticipated all of it and prepared for it anyway, calmly and completely, the same way she'd always done everything. There was one thing in the letter I hadn't told Mr. Bellows about, because it wasn't legal information. It was something she'd written just for me. Near the very end, after all the practical things, she'd written, "I hope you know that being chosen is worth more than being born into. I chose you. I would choose you again. Take care of the roses in the backyard. They need to be cut back every spring or they'll crowd themselves out. Take care of yourself the same way." I started crying when I read that part. I was crying again now, alone in the kitchen, which felt right. The roses would need cutting back in April. I'd never done it without her showing me, but she'd shown me enough times that I knew what to do. You find the dead wood first. You cut it back to where the living part starts. You cut it back to where the living part starts. You leave it space to grow. I thought I could probably figure that out. I had learned from the best. I keep thinking about the roses. Not the mediation, not the legal folders, not the look on my father's face when the numbers were laid out in front of him. I keep thinking about Grandma Lorene on her knees in the backyard in April, showing me where to cut, telling me you have to find the dead wood first before you can help anything grow. She wasn't talking about roses. She never was. Not really. What happened to me, what happened to all of us in that story, wasn't random. My parents made choices, small ones at first, then larger ones, and those choices compounded the way debt does, quietly and then all at once. They chose to leave. They chose to take her money and not ask about me. They chose, when she died, to see an opportunity instead of a daughter they had failed. And every one of those choices built the room they found themselves sitting in on that February morning, staring at 15 years of their own behavior laid out in a manila folder. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's true, and because I spent a long time being confused about why things turned out the way they did. The answer isn't complicated. What you do accumulates. What you neglect accumulates too. Lauren understood this. That's what I mean when I say she was the smartest person I knew. Not book smart, though she was that too. but wise in the way that only comes from paying close attention to how life actually works. She kept records not because she was paranoid, but because she respected cause and effect. She knew that the truth, properly documented, doesn't need to be argued. It just needs to be shown. She also showed me something harder to document. She showed me what it looks like to do the right thing when no one is watching and there's no guarantee it will matter. She sent money to a son who didn't call. She reached out to a daughter-in-law who asked for cash instead of offering comfort. She did these things not because they were returned, but because she had decided a long time ago what kind of person she was going to be. That's a kind of moral clarity I'm still working toward. I think most of us are. And then there's the part I think about when things get hard. The part where she sat down, sick and running out of time, and instead of giving in to bitterness, she made a plan. She thought it through. She anticipated what might happen and she prepared for it, calmly, methodically, with her beautiful handwriting and her careful mind. She didn't leave my protection to chance, she left it to evidence. I used to think resilience meant pushing through hard things by sheer force of will. Lorene taught me it's quieter than that. It's continuing to act with integrity when you're tired and scared and there's no applause. It's making the decision to keep showing up, for someone else, for yourself, for the work, long after the feeling that sustained you has passed. I walked out of that mediation building into cold February air and I felt something I didn't expect. Not triumph. Something closer to peace. The kind that comes not from winning, but from knowing that the person who mattered most had seen me clearly, had loved what she saw, and had trusted me to carry it forward. The roses need cutting back this April. I know what to do.